Support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
What is the connection between dock workers and primary school students? Or can you draw a line from workers' skills gap in our region to the perceived outsized effect of a slowing Chinese economy on the Carolinas? Welcome to the most widely watched source of Carolina business and public policy. The answer to those questions is what we will wade into on this edition of CBR. And later on, we welcome the CEO of the North Carolina Ports Authority, Paul Koza.
Major funding also by Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Brenda Berg of Best NC, John Lummus of the Upstate SC Alliance, and special guest, Paul Koza, CEO of the North Carolina State Ports Authority.
Well, happy spring. Welcome to our program. Spring is in the Carolinas. Nothing better, right? Good to have you both here. John, welcome. Brenda, good to have you both. Been trying to get her forever, and glad, John, that you got the job at the Upstate Alliance and you're on this program as well. So
thank you.
Brenda, we'll start with you, and John, please jump in. So in North Carolina recently, this past primary, Brenda, it's not a surprise to you, but voters widely endorsed a $2 billion bond package. A lot of education, some transportation. Was that surprising to you? I mean, by wide margin, they said yes to this?
Not surprising at all. I think the people of North Carolina understand that we have to invest in education. They understand that we're a growing state, and I think that they really heard the message that the education leaders and everyone sent, that we're falling behind, particularly in areas of STEM, our facilities at our community colleges, at our university systems. There was a need, and clearly the population, everyone in North Carolina got it. It was 65% voted for the bond. So we're in a great place. I'm thrilled, very proud of our state and everyone who came out to vote.
So, John, the State House in Columbia has made some meaningful, at least the Senate has proposed $400 million. We'll see what the House does with this idea of $400+ million around transportation. But education and transportation in the Palmetto State are the same thing in North Carolina. You know, they compete for the top priority. Brenda's talked about education in North Carolina. Is education in South Carolina, is it as critical as for economic development?
Education is always critical for economic development. The first thing that every prospect asks us when they come in the door is workforce. Where am I going to get my workforce? Where am I going to get my future workforce? So making sure that we've got the K through 12 and even before the K, you know, in a good program and moving that forward. And then also how do our universities and our community colleges, we call them technical colleges in South Carolina, respond to that. And it's vital that we have those funded. I think South Carolina's done a really good job in funding our workforce development programs with our Ready SC program and our Apprenticeship Carolina program, and then what we do at the technical colleges. And you know, K through 12 is always a challenge, but I think we're doing a good job in with that.
Brenda, I want to bring you back into this thing. The North Carolina public education system, I'm reading this because I want to get this right, got a failing grade from a recent report from the Network of Public Education. Not so much react to that, but you know, North Carolina has always thought of itself as progressive, out front, a New South community. How does it's a bad way to say it, but how does the education establishment in the old North State, how do they take being back on their heels to some degree around the brand of education? I mean, doesn't that run counter to really what North Carolina feels about itself?
And North Carolina has such a strong history of, as you said, being a very progressive state. We are the only state that has education, not just in our Constitution, but as the Bill of Rights. 1977, we were the first state in the country to have universal kindergarten for every student in North Carolina, which has really contributed to our surge in education as our achievement level. So now we're sitting here, and I know as business leaders, I represent over 100 business leaders in education, advocating for education, and we're looking at the highest graduation rates in the history of North Carolina with 85% high school graduation rate, and yet, as you pointed out, we're getting failing grades here and there. We actually are tied with Mississippi for the lowest ACT scores in the country, which is our best measure of whether or not our students are actually leaving with that diploma actually career and college ready. And what we've discovered is it's not so much that we are getting worse, and it is absolutely not that our educators, or as you mentioned, the education establishment is doing badly. What we're really realizing as business leaders is that they're working in an outdated system. We are trying to generate so much more out of our education system. This 85% graduation rate has to be 100%. Community colleges and universities and certificates has to be 67%. 50 years ago, those numbers were much smaller. 17% needed something past a high school degree. And yet if you look at our classrooms, whether it's community colleges, universities, or especially in K-12, the classrooms look exactly the same as they always have. The pipeline of talent looks exactly the way it already has. And as millennials look to choose what kinds of professions they want to go into, they don't want to go into the education profession for exactly that reason. The profession, the institution of education hasn't kept up, while our educators are doing, frankly, a phenomenal job for the situation that they're in. The business community really wants to step up and see what we can do to help. We look at the professional pathways for educators, how we prepare and develop our principals. These are things where we can really get involved and say, no one understands the value of talent for our organizations better than business, so how can we help the education community?
So, you talked about so many things there. Where do I even start? but North Carolina's losing talent to South Carolina. How do some of these things that Brenda just, how do you characterize this, John?
Well, I mean, from the workforce, again, going back to that and the way that it affects economic development, she's talking about, I'll start with the higher education area. In our area, Columbus University does so many things with applied research. We have the ICAR facility, we have the Advanced Materials Research facility, we have several others that they're focused on the industry areas, and it's so important to have that connection with our businesses and industry. But it gets down to the other level, what she's saying about having businesses part of K through 12 education. You've got to have the businesses supporting those groups. You got to have internships and co-ops and whatever you have. In the manufacturing area, we really need to have as many of those kind of internships with students that are already in high school going to the career centers. 65% of the jobs in the economy now moving forward are going to be technically based. 20%, and those will need a community college education or some kind of certification. 20% will need a college degree, 15% will need at least a high school degree, but that is reducing. So right now in our high schools, it seems to me that we're pushing everybody towards the 4-year degree, but only 20% of the jobs in the future are going to need that 4-year degree. What we need to be pushing toward is the technical degrees that then they can build off that through stackable credentials and go back and get their 4-year degree, go back and get their master's degree, but start out at that level so we can have the technical skills that we need, because when we work primarily in manufacturing. When those companies come in and talk to us, they're talking about getting welders and CNC machinists, mechatronics professionals. That's what they need, and they need people that are skilled and can do the job and know computers and have the soft skills. And that's what we teach in the community college and technical college system, and that's what's going to be needed.
Brenda, you were going to add something?
Same gap that we have in North Carolina is we still want students who are going into high quality 4-year degrees. We have, I know one of my members it takes 2 years to hire a PhD level candidate, so we still have that need, but our biggest gap is absolutely in certificate programs and associate's degrees. A job that used to not even require a high school degree now is so much more complex, and even retail space. You have to be able to do much more than you had to do before, and so we need to start developing that pipeline that in that middle space, one, getting everyone to a high school diploma, and then getting something more than that.
So in about 30 seconds, how punitive is the workers' skills gap to really North and South Carolina remaining competitive, not just domestically, but internationally? How really punitive is this?
This is the future of North Carolina's economic development.
Is it holding North Carolina back
40% of North Carolina employers are reporting critical vacancies. 40% critical vacancies. And then you look at the gaps of, we're looking at tens of thousands of vacancies. Yeah. And yes, we can bring people in. Everyone wants to come to live in North Carolina, but if they're not happy with the K-12 education system, they won't come with their children. So there's a twofold part. Is our education system developing the talent for our businesses, but also is it providing the education that our business employees want their children to be in? So there's a big gap there. We also know that about 7,000 people are underemployed in North Carolina.
Yeah, but we could drill down to that. About 10 seconds. Is that the same case South Carolina? Is it that critical?
It's the most critical issue that companies ask about when they're coming into our area. So it's on their minds. I think we do a really good job in South Carolina with our workforce training, but we need to keep getting those folks in that pipeline to make sure that we're going to be successful in the future. But what I tell companies that are coming in the Upstate, if you pay a competitive wage, give good benefits, and have a good work environment, you can find skilled people to come in, and that's what our message is, and we haven't failed in that to this point.
Okay, thank you, guys. Thank you. Stay with us on as we bring our guest out. Next week on the program, he's the President and Chief Executive Officer of not just one of the Carolinas, but one of the nation's largest regional real estate firms, residential real estate firms. His name is Pat Riley. He's from the Allen Tate Company, and he will be here talking about residential real estate, as hot as it's been, where it's going, and what the challenges are to have such tight inventory in the residential real estate market, and, oh, by the way, still cheap money. And then in 2 weeks, Dr. Fred Carter from Francis Marion University will be here. He knows where all the bodies are buried in South Carolina, and he will be talking about policy, about education, and economic development. You know, it's good to have beachfront property. In the Carolinas, we almost take that attribute for granted. In fact, there are 19 states in this union, at least in the continental United States, that have coastline access. We, of course, have 2 of those 19. What's good about it is North and South Carolina ports give the Carolinas a distinct economic and cultural advantage. More specifically, the North Carolina Ports Authority is responsible for almost $500 million in annual and local state tax revenue, 25,000 directly related jobs, and 40,000 indirectly accredited to the North Carolina ports and in general shipping and everything in that world. Joining us now and finishing his second year as the CEO is the North Carolina Ports Authority Chief Executive Officer, Paul Koza. Paul, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be here.
Wow, some pretty good growth in the ports over the last 2 years. Paul, you've been kind of overseeing this. Is this about the economy? Is this about some of the strategic shifts you've made? How do you couch this growth that you've had?
You know, Chris, I think a couple of things that happened to get the growth that we're seeing. Right now, no question on the economy side. We saw last year a shifting of the supply chains coming because of challenges on the West Coast with labor unions, things that were happening, so that helped. Other part is what we see quite a bit that's occurring too, is we have, especially in North Carolina, what I call an underserved market. So what's happened through the years, and this is on international imports and exports, we've seen a lot of our companies that are situated, especially in North Carolina, be using other gateways that are around us. And that's fine if it's efficient, it's fine if it makes sense. I always like to say that transportation moves like electricity, path of least resistance. For transportation, that's distance and also economies. And what's happened is these are companies in North Carolina have not been using North Carolina ports as much. We're going out marketing our services, we're improving our services, we're putting investments into our ports, and as that happens then, it makes sense for the avenue to see this growth.
How do you distill out where we are in the economy from what you're seeing in the tea leaves that you see in shipping?
Well, it's interesting, especially on the export side. So when we hear about a strong dollar, when we hear about that China is slowing down, when we see what's happening, especially in Europe, so our main trading partners, there's no question exports are being affected. It's being affected throughout the U.S. Just some of the raw materials, other types of industries, things that we typically export is slowing down. There's no question about it. Imports have been staying pretty much steady. Our U.S. economy is stretching along 2-3%. Yeah. We hope to see that continue over time, and that's where we'll see more of hopefully a little bit more of the inbound as well as the outbound growing again.
Brenda, question?
Of course, I have to talk about education. And as
This is
you're
good.
seeing the modernization, I used to import products and run a manufacturing company, so I'm very familiar with ports. And the technology has changed dramatically even in just the last few years. So as you're seeing jobs that used to be low-skilled jobs and now they're high-tech jobs, what kinds of gaps are you seeing? What are you doing within those communities? How are you seeing the challenges for education?
No, it's a great question, Brenda. And I think I'm I'll say obviously a huge supporter of logistics, international logistics. And one thing that happens, it's an exciting industry, it's a dynamic industry, it's an industry that's going to be around, but technology is a large part of it. So as we continue to migrate to more efficient supply chains, what happens is we need technology, we need higher skills, we need higher education to make that happen. It's something that it's going to be a long-term type of opportunity and something that we want to see continued. I'd love to see in the industry continued growth and more of a chance for folks to get part of, because it's a fun part.
And are you engaging Cape Fear?
Yes,
I've
we
seen
do.
some great work there at Cape
Yeah,
Fear.
no, we do very much. Cape Fear as well as UNC Wilmington. We have different types of intern programs that we bring about. That's fantastic. We do other things of just trying to get folks out on the terminal, understanding transportation logistics, because it's just a great job. It's so much, it's fun, and in a lot of ways people don't have natural exposure to it. So it's a chance as anything else in learning to get that exposure.
John?
Sure. I know North Carolina's done a good job with their port. South Carolina works hard on the Charleston port. It's been very successful as well. We have an inland port. Y'all also have a plan for that. How do you see the ports having a huge impact on the Southeast in the future after, with post-Panamax ships and things like that? How can we work together?
No, two things. It's a big portion of it. Again, being in logistics my whole life, transportation, we're going to see this continued migration of the demographics into the Southeast. Right now, North Carolina is the 9th most populous state. We're going to continue to grow over time. We're going to see this natural shifting, and with it, what's going to come is industry. Importing, exporting, global trade will continue. There's no question about that, and we have to be positioned. How we want to be positioned is through our port infrastructure, but also our roads, rail, bridges, everything that can get to the inland as well as to the port area. It's a huge advantage for us right now, and I think what we want to have is, especially for North Carolina, keep that advantage moving forward.
Paul, does North Carolina have the bandwidth, and I'll use that term, can not just trucks and rail, but is it an easy connection to New Hanover, Pender counties, where you are, your area of dominant influence? One of the things, and I'm sorry, let me make a statement and then please answer the question. One of the things that I think Newsom and the South Carolina Ports Authority have done well is they have the perception and in fact have made it easy to get down to Charleston, the low country. Do you feel like Wilmington has been able to be accessible enough? Is that one of your challenges, or how do you?
It's always a long-term challenge, but right now we're doing well. We have on the interstate side, Interstate 40 coming in. We have 74 getting out. We have great routes into 95 other parts of the state, very important. Frankly, from a standpoint of our performance, we very much stress lack of congestion, quick moving of product. Truckers love to come in and to use us and to be able to get in and out very quickly. So that I think is great. Longer term for the state, I'm just a real advocate that we want to continue to invest in, especially our interstate highways, because that makes so much sense. Moving into the interior areas, our shot into Charlotte, very important part of a market that needs to really be improved from a standpoint of international transportation. I think, frankly, North Carolina Ports needs to step up for that. We're ready to do that. And in that case, we have a rail connection, which is second to none. We are looking very much right now, we're working with CSX of having a direct rail connection coming into the Charlotte area to be able to make that artery efficient. It takes time, it takes investment, but we're getting some things going, which we want to say.
Brenda?
Can you share more about how that affects us inland? I know that I had a hard time finding factories in North Carolina. We want to get back into the manufacturing business and really increase that. How will that work as we build up the ports and affect us inland?
It's funny, so many times, Brenda, when I hear is I'll go around the state and talk to different folks, and it'll be, well, I know that our ports are on the coast. It does a lot of good things for the coastal areas. Yes, we do, and we want to continue that. But we're an artery inland, and we're a conduit inland. And I always like to say nothing starts or stops at the port. It's coming from somewhere, going somewhere. We're a conduit. We want to make it as efficient as possible. As we continue to grow, as we look at other businesses, everything in the world today imports or exports, maybe importing raw materials for exporting finished product, vice versa. And to have that transportation network that's efficient, that's going to be our critical nature for the future and our competitive nature for the future.
Great.
And I'll answer a little bit to that. You know, how does the port affect the state as a whole? I think, you know, on the coast, everybody says, oh, well, like with our Charleston port, it's going to help Charleston, it's going to help Boeing, it's going to help Volvo. But 65% of the port traffic coming out of the state of South Carolina comes from the Upstate. So it's key. And so I think to answer that question, the whole state of North Carolina, in your case, can benefit because the whole state of South Carolina has benefited. We have an inland port facility, Greer, which is right next to the BMW plant, 212-mile rail line that is dedicated to go to the port. BMW just announced that their 2 millionth car is being exported out of the port today. So I think having that port infrastructure and that connection both through rail and through infrastructure is important, and I'm glad to hear that y'all are doing that well. And I do, again, want us to work together as states, as a region. While I know we're going to compete, I think it's important for us to work together as a region to make each other better.
You know, definitely, no question. I think what happens too is this over time. What we want to watch, especially in the southeast region, is congestion. Because we've seen what happened on the West Coast. We know what's happening in the Northeast. And that lack of congestion is key. And we want to continue not only to invest in that infrastructure, to make sure that we also have the infrastructure on the port side to be able to keep those things going.
You know, I'm sorry, Paul.
Yeah,
let me circle back around to this issue about transportation.
Yeah.
There are big debates, in some case very acute and acerbic debates in towns like Charlotte and Raleigh, certainly Charleston. In the Upstate, they've seemed to work that out in Upstate South Carolina. But what would you say to not just those that make public policy, but some of the municipalities that are really debating about transportation policy? I mean, that is a backbone of what you do. Yeah. How do we need to look at transportation maybe a little bit differently than it's being couched now in the public?
I think two ways. One is when we look at, let's say for North Carolina, it's a transportation network. It's not just a region, it's not just one component. When we look at it, we look at it from the perspective, how does our rail connect throughout the state? How does our roads connect throughout the state? How do those conduits all come together? So we want to think in those terms. We don't want to think only regionally. We want to really think statewide. The other part is investment takes time, transportation takes time, but it's a long path, and we want to have a vision and a plan. A short-term, put in a bridge, doing a road, that makes sense, but how does it connect to the long-term plan? Where we want to see growth, especially where we want to see growth in a lot of the rural areas where we've lost some of the textiles, we've lost furniture, we've lost some of these areas. How to get that back, my view, I think, is through continued investment in transportation. Efficient and modern transportation system will be a great accelerator of growth. I've been all over the world and we see those things happen.
We have about 2 minutes, Brenda.
Going back to Connect NC, great bond effort. Thrilled that there was so much of an education investment, and part of why they were able to make a big education investment is because of the new investments in transportation. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, no, that's great. This as well. We've received through the bond, also through funding through the General Assembly for the first time. We're getting over $70 million in this next 2 years. We're putting an investment program in place for North Carolina ports of over $100 million, and that's going to continue. Again, all investments situated so we can be efficient in being able to meet the demands of our customers, the cargo owners in the state, and in states around us. It's very important what we want to do.
Yeah, about a minute. You get the last question.
Sure. We've been debating in South Carolina what to do about our road funding. The Senate, as you said earlier, is giving $400 million this year. How do you see that y'all's gas tax that y'all have passed over the last several years has helped economic development as regards to the port and as regards to general infrastructure?
I'll preface as always, I'm a transportation person, so I look from that standpoint. Wherever there's dollars, where it makes sense to go into the network, to go into where we got to invest for the future, it's just really something that makes sense for us. It's great for the region, it's great for all over, and we are a region. There's no question about it. We have as a state, we go into the other states, but just keeping that efficiency and lack of congestion, so key. One of the things we really stress at North Carolina ports is very important. We move trucks in and out of our port faster than any port around us. We're able to get ships in faster than any port around us. We want to continue that because that brings down cost. The cost comes down. We have efficient transportation. It's great for our companies. They're making more money and they want to grow, and then they want to be here, which is important.
And it's not fair to ask, but can you move them faster, Paul, because you don't have the volume? And 10 seconds to answer that one, sorry. because you don't have the volume, you still can get them in and out pretty quickly, but what if you get the concentration? Then it become a problem?
Well, that's where future investment comes in. So you have to be pre-planning. So you're looking at and saying, okay, where are we going to be in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? If you can stay ahead of it, you're good to go.
All right, we're going to have you back in less than 2 years so you can talk about that.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Good to have you on the
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to see you, John.
Thank you.
Brenda, welcome. Come back soon, both of you. All right. We'll do it. Until next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join us and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Novant Health, bringing you world-class technology, clinicians, and care when and where you need it. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services, with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, where healthcare is changing for the better. Find out how at ahealthysc.tv. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.org.